Their first month back in Winterfell had been difficult. Catelyn took Jon's presence much worse than he'd anticipated and refused to even look at the boy. Furthermore, whenever Ned approached her, she was so chillingly polite to him that he couldn't converse with her for more than a few moments without escaping, tail between his legs. She kept his son Robb near her at all times, so even the joy elicited by the sight of his boy was sparse. It didn't help that she was having a very hard time acclimating to the northern climate, and seemed determined to resent him for it too. Ned has been so tired, so grief-stricken, that he'd spent the first month doing little but trying to feebly participate in the running of Winterfell and spending most of his time in the Godswood, sitting against the heart tree, hoping for an answer. He may have continued the pattern well into the second month had the raven not arrived. Maester Luwin had handed him the parchment, eyes soft and understanding, and Ned had almost burned the thing when he say the stag on the wax. A letter from Robert was the last thing he needed. Robert had come to him the morning after that disastrous feast, hungover and deeply contrite. He'd let his anger get ahead of him, he claimed. He wanted to take it back. But he'd decreed it all before the court. There was no undoing it now, not unless he wanted to seem weak. He'd begged Ned's forgiveness. However, for the first time, Ned had been unable to grant it. The consequences of the betrothal were too numerous to forgive so easily. Still, the young Stark Lord recognized his own part in this mess. His doubt had hurt his friend, and Robert's temper had gotten out of hand. They both acknowledged these truths, and the two had parted on amicable but strained terms. But the message had not been from King's Landing, but rather Dragonstone, said the Master. Ned didn't know if that made things easier or not. Stannis was a challenging man to understand, and Ned didn't have the mental fortitude to tackle whatever scathing words were on the missive. He'd put it off for a week before the shame had burned too painfully, and he'd had to open it. To Lord Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, I write to you with the following proposal. Every 2 moons we shall exchange information about the activities we have begun or completed in regards to the betrothal between your son, Jon Snow, and my ward, Daenerys of House Targaryen. I foresee the marriage occurring within her 16th year, and not a moment sooner. Her nurse, the woman at court during the betrothal, insists on this age, though it is very late. I find myself in agreement, however. You will need time to properly educate your son. Furthermore, that should afford us both enough time to properly plan for their future and for you to foster Jon Snow, if you deem it fit. We should begin with details regarding the construction of their home. My research indicates that the North is a large territory, but with wide swaths of unpopulated land. I will need your expertise on locations that will be acceptable to begin construction of a castle. It must be of suitable size and strength, befitting a former princess, and I shall insist on powerful defenses, so construction will take time. I will, of course, contribute in men and resources. Furthermore, men and small folk must be found to fill their lands, and support them with their incomes and agriculture. I have learned of these glasshouses, so constructing and populating a village is of paramount importance. Next, I will inform you of what steps I have currently taken to ensure her proper education. I have acquired both a maester to educate her on the realm and a young daughter of House Velaryon to instruct her in the intricacies of being a lady. I forewent a scepter, for I do not believe she requires education in superstitious babble. I will be expecting your reply in 2 moons. Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Stowe, Lord of Dragonstone. Eddard had read the letter twice more, and then, unable to help it, had begun to laugh. He laughed so hard and so long that he was gasping for air, thankful he was at least alone in his chambers, lest his people think him mad. Finally, he'd calmed enough to read, though the letter once more smiling, before he'd taken a deep breath and went to find the maester. It was time to begin fulfilling his responsibilities. He had a letter to respond to. Now, 1 month later, first letter sent Eddard Stark held a single candle as he traversed the dark crypts of Winterfell, passing vigilant stone, lords and stone kings, swords ready for battle, with their direwolf companions by their sides. The crypt felt simultaneously empty, yet full, as if the statues watched him and knew all, saw all. as if, should he sit before them, they would come alive and tell him stories of tragedies and triumphs long past. "You are not alone, Eddard, son of Stark," their eyes seemed to whisper, coming to life when hit by the flame of the candle. "Come, tell us of your troubles. We shall swap stories." But there was only one person Ned had come to see on this day, her son's name day, her last day. "Promise me, Ned." "Aye, I will," he murmured, coming to stand before her silent statue. He had disobeyed tradition and had statues carved for her and Brandon alongside their father. Staring into her with solemn, sad face, he noted that the carver had done a horrible job. The woman before him looked nothing like Lyanna. She may have Lyanna's face and features, but she didn't have her soul. He gazed upon a maiden rather than a wolf. But then, no stone carver that lived could ever hope to have such talent. Movement slow, Ned lit the candle at her altar and bowed deeply for one long moment, tears gathering upon his lashes. Then he quietly placed a single flower before her, petals a delicate blue. "A winter rose, Lyanna, a tribute for you both. I will always hate you, Rhaegar, for all the pain you've wrought. But I cannot fault you for loving her, nor she, you. I don't know what you would think of all that's occurred. Plans are being made, Lyanna, though slowly. We Northerners are a stubborn lot, and I, an inept lord, a betrothal to a dragon. My lord, this is unacceptable. The king shames you, he shames the North." So enraged was Gretchen Umber that his fist rattled the hall when it struck the thick wooden table. The giant man was shaking, face screwed up in rage as he stood amongst the bannermen in Winterfell's great hall. "He spits on our loyalty, and for what? Because Eddard Stark opposed the murder of a babe. Any man of honor would have done the same," men shouted in agreement, concurring. Ned's developing headache throbbed. They had been at it for over an hour now, lord after lord, making a point to let all know how of their protest. A calm discussion of events had rapidly deteriorated into ceaseless repetition of discontent. Rickard Karstark stood from his place across the hall, face thunderous. "We put him on that bloody chair. We bled and fought at his side to oppose the mad king," he shouted. "We freed the continent from tyranny, and now he repays us with this." What was he thinking? Shouts of agreement, and more men rose to their feet, voices rising ever higher as they made their discontent known. All of Winterfell could probably hear their rage. "My lords, enough. Enough, I say." Eddard finally stood, voice thunderous. The hall silenced. "I was wrong to doubt my king, my loyal friend. I dishonored myself and the North when I believed that Robert would have truly ordered the death of a child." Roose Bolton, who had been silently observing until that point, stood, garnering immediate attention. The man always watched and rarely spoke needless words, but while that trait was usually something Ned valued in men, the Lord Bolton made him wary. "My lord, we all know you had just cause. The king should have known, taken action against the Lannisters when they sacked the city and murdered babes in their cribs. But he did not, and thus how could you have known that he would not condone further atrocities?" Heads nodded and murmurs of agreement filled the room. "However," Roose continued, "while we wish no harm to come to the Targaryen babe, we cannot simply allow her to take residence within the North, not after all her family has done to us and to House Stark." "Hear, hear," men murmured, nodding along. "Wedding her to your bastard of all people is also a profound slight. He now forces us to find accommodations, to build a bastard, a castle and sup with him as if he is true-born, and to populate his lands with men we can't afford to lose. And all this the king did in anger against you, who was like a brother to him, who placed him upon the Iron Throne rather than taking it himself." A pause, long enough for Ned's heart to beat thrice, before Roose asked, "How will you respond, Lord Stark? How will you respond against this attack on Northern honor?" Finished, a small smile curving his lips, Roose sat, and all the lords turned to Ned, expectant looks on their faces. He faltered, gazing around, heart pounding. He had no answer to give them. Had father, had Brandon been here, they'd have known what to do. They'd have given a rousing speech and won the support of the lords. A shuddering breath. "But I'm the only one left, Lyanna, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I was never supposed to rule. I was supposed to. Wanted to marry a woman from a far, hot kingdom, and only have to worry about my own family and a small household. Violet eyes, shining raven hair, golden-tanned skin, and that beautiful smile as they danced. Now I have to care for the whole north. My wife is cold to me, and my family is all but gone. Gods help me. He took a fortifying breath, pausing as if expecting an answer, and then slowly calmed. But I know that past is gone, and I have to make strides towards the future. With my people, with my wife, it will be a difficult endeavor, Lyanna, but I will prevail. He smiled ruefully. I have also found myself with an unlikely ally, though the circumstances are less than ideal. Nevertheless, I like him more than I expected. Perhaps his advice is warranted. Ned paused again, staring at her face, half convinced she looked almost approving. Finally, I come today to beg for your forgiveness. I need someone, A, to oversee the construction of John's castle and care for it until he is of age. I need a man who I can trust above all others, a man who loved you more, perhaps, than we all did. He was the only one who protested your marriage, Lyanna. The only one who insisted that you should be allowed to choose. I think he blames me for all of it. Deep inside, I think he hates me. He took a deep breath. He will not do it for me, but to convince him, I may have to break my word. But you loved and trusted him, Lyanna, and I shall take that as a sign. He found Benjen alone upon the battlements, staring north. His brother was pallid and skinny, hair stringy and unwashed. He was deteriorating more every day, and Ned's eyes burned to see it. I think I will join the watch, Ned, he said, quiet. There is nothing for me here. No purpose, no laughter, just ghosts and regrets. I have to leave this place before I take my own life. Yes, I will join the watch and die with honor. Ned swallowed hard, stomach cramping. You can't! Benjen slowly turned, meeting Ned's eyes with a well of bitterness. You are not my lord, brother. I am telling you, not asking. Ned ploughed ahead, heart pounding. I need someone I trust to care for John's lands until he is of age. I need you, Benjen. Please. For a moment Benjen just stared at him, expressionless, and then he exploded in shocking rage. He pushed his face near Ned's teeth-gashing, eyes wild. Are you fucking mad? You would order me, to take care of your bastard's lands, the lands he will share with the woman whose house destroyed us. You asked me to live there, knowing that Lyanna is gone, but a Targaryen still lives. Benjen stepped closer and pushed him hard until Ned slammed against the battlements, mere instances from a perilous drop. I ask, not order, he said quietly, heart pounding. Please. Benjen spat in his face, murderous, and whipped around to leave. Ned surged forward and grabbed his arm, halting him. He took a fortifying breath, wiping the spittle from his cheek. Don't do it for me, do it for Lyanna. Benjen was still for many heartbeats, and Ned's anxiety was so high he was beginning to feel light-headed. He shook it off, clenching his teeth. Benjen turned, slowly, face leached of color. Promise me, Ned. He swallowed hard. There is something I must tell you. About Lyanna and Rhaegar. His hands shook. And about John. When Stannis had returned to Storm's End for the last time, he did so for Maester Crescent. He wished to bid the man farewell, face to face. It was owed to him, after all, for everything the man had done to raise and educate a young Stannis Baratheon. How he had kept the lonely boy company while his brother and the other children ostracized him. Crescent was only person who had faced Stannis's brisk nature and cold replies with patience and gentle care rather than anger and insult. The old man was the only one who understood that Stannis was not cruel, not cold, just dedicated, introverted, and painfully awkward. When Stannis told the man of his new position and his new charge, he had meant the words as a farewell and a thank you. The Maester had taken it as an invitation. A fortnight later, when all the remaining details of the move to Dragonstone were complete, he appeared before Stannis's door, his few belongings packed in 3 chests, ready to leave. He wished to meet his new pupil immediately, he insisted, and scolded Stannis for not bringing her. Daenerys had sailed back to Dragonstone with her nurse and some loyal guards. The man felt pity for a girl scorned by the continent, as he had felt pity for a young lord scorned by his family. Stannis had protested the Maester was of Storm's End. Maesters followed the family, not its members. He should stay for Renly. But Cresson was stubborn and waded away. I've made my choice, young lord. I am a Maester, not a slave. You and that little girl need me far more than Lord Renly, or Storm's End, ever will. Now hurry and prepare. I don't remember raising a tardy student. Conversation finished. The man pushed past Stannis into the room, sat upon a chair, and gazed at the lord expectantly, waiting to be obeyed. Stannis complied, and, with his back towards Cresson, allowed a rare smile to bloom upon his grim lips. Did I hope he would come with me? Yes, I think I did. Before leaving, they met up with Davos Seaworth, who had gone to collect his family. He returned to his lord with his beloved wife, Maria, their young sons, and carts full of belongings. They had discussed it, and Malia decided that they should all join Stannis at Dragonstone, rather than separate. Davos had happily agreed, and together they set their affairs in order, leaving Rainwood in a castellan's capable hands. A week later, when they docked at Dragonstone, the Maester had scowled at the endless steps that marked the only passage into the fortress. Stairs, he spat. The enemy of an old man's bones. Ah, well. I suppose I won't ever leave. And you are young, my lord. Should I require anything, I can simply make you traverse them. Stannis hadn't denied the added duty. Later, upon being introduced to the giggling baby girl, her violet eyes wide with wonder as she delighted in her surroundings, Cresson's eyes had watered, and he'd smiled gently. Ah, yes, this is what I have missed. A young, eager charge to guide. Hello, little princess. You and I shall get along splendidly. She's not a princess, Stannis had automatically corrected. Robert revoked the title. Myra and Cresson has scowled at him in union, and even baby Daenerys seemed offended. Hush, boy. I am 60 and 4 years old. I have seen winters harsher than anything you can imagine. I know a princess when I see one, he'd sniffed. Myra and blonde-haired, blue-eyed nurse, who had endless loyalty towards the girl, had warmed to the Maester immediately. They'd chatted excitedly about the future, walking away and not sparing Stannis another glance. Dismayed, Stannis got the uneasy feeling that he'd just witnessed the birth of a powerful alliance. He was suddenly concerned about who the real authority in this household would be. Still, Stannis could not deny how his tension drained as things all fell into place. Now, Stannis stood alone on a tall balcony overlooking the Blackwater, Aegon's famous painted table at his back, and surveyed his new holdings. Standing tall, eyes cool, and hands clasped behind his back, Stannis thought, "Now then, shall we begin? I find it a good tactic, when trying to lead men, to band them together under a common purpose. An enemy, perhaps, or better yet a cause, a belief, an illusion, greater than themselves. You Northerners value honor above all else. Use that, Stark, as your weapon." Sitting once more before the Lords of the North, his wife to his left and his master to his right, Eddard Stark knew that he had a decision to make. Stannis' words played in his mind. How he handled this meeting, Ned knew, would be a pivotal moment in his rule. Staring down at his bannerman, who waited expectantly for him to speak, Ned slowly grew surer of himself. Yes, he decided. This is what was needed. This was the only way. But he would not manipulate or cajole. He would lay all the information on the table and allow them to decide. He would mix northern honesty with southern strategy. Ned stood, allowing his naturally grim face to command their full attention. After waiting a beat, he spoke, voice serious. "My lords, I have gathered you here today to say that I do not have a decision for you." He watched them exchange surprised looks, but now he had their full attention. He ignored the bite of insecurity, ploughing forward. "All I have is honesty. All I have is my word and my duty to you, my loyal bannerman, as well as my duty to the crown. When King Robert decreed that my son, Jon Snow, would wed the last dragon, he did so in anger. But his anger was just. For I, Eddard Stark, his brother by choice, his sworn lord, compromised my principles when I allowed southern politics to cloud my judgment. My king was right to reprimand me. A lord is not beyond mistakes, and a northern lord must meet the consequences of his mistakes with dignity." He could see that the men were paying more carefully attention to him now. A few men were nodding, but the lords of the more powerful houses remained unconvinced. However, while the king's punishment is hard, we must not see this as a slight, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to fulfill a long-ago oath that my ancestor, Lord Cregan Stark, made with the dragons, the only pact that the North has failed to honor. Yes, my lords, the marriage between Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen will finally complete the pact of ice and fire, and our duty and tie to the dragons will finally be complete. Lord Jorah Mormont stood, garnering their attention. The Targaryens voided any pacts between us when they broke their oaths and burned your Lord Father alive. Why should we, then, be beholden to ours? There were murmurs of agreement. Ned stared them all down before meeting Mormont's eyes. The North does not meet dishonor with dishonor, my lord. We are not Southerners. Under his reprimanding gaze, Mormont flushed and sat. Ned saw that many other lords looked uncomfortable, but many more were nodding with agreement. Emboldened, he continued, "We will show Westeros what the North is made of, my lords. That we are men of honor above all else. That we fulfill our debts, no matter how many years pass, because to do otherwise would shame us. Eventually, had the dragons not fallen, this marriage would have happened. We would have needed a castle, a village, and townsfolks. We would have needed to sacrifice to keep our word. But the North does not allow paltry concern, stop them from fulfilling a promise, from fulfilling the pact we made." A chorus of agreement met his words. "We will show the jaded, manipulative Southerners that the North remembers. We cannot abide by a marriage with a true-born son, because it would mean forgetting the past, but we also cannot forget our duty to uphold the vows of our ancestors. What would our forefathers say, hearing us talk of breaking their words, of shamming them and ourselves? We will show all the lords of Westeros that the North is a place with strong, honest people who remember, men who keep their word. We will show them that we do now cower and bend from their silly games of spite." Voices rose chorusing their support. Ned held his head high. "Are you with me, my lords? Aye, are you with me, with our forefathers, with the North? Aye, will we, together, uphold the pact of ice and fire? Aye." The room shook forth their passionate proclamations, men rising to their feet to boldly declare their support. Only Roose Bolton remained sitting, scowl in place. But eventually he, too, stood in agreement. "For Northern honor," Great John Umber shouted. "To the wedding of ice and fire," Lord Karstark bellowed. "To Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North." The men exploded in support, chanting the Stark name. Stark, Stark, Stark. Finally, relived and proud, Ned looked at his wife, who was staring at him for the first time without a look of cold disdain. Her eyes were soft, awed, and slowly she smiled. Him. Ned's lips curled in return. 10 months later, Stannis was about bursting with irritation. 7 hells, but the lords under his domain were a stubborn lot. They made a great show of being falsely pleasant, but their oaths of fealty were said in such saccharine tones that Stannis gathered they'd essentially meant that he could go fuck himself, for all they cared. They had no loyalty to Stannis, and everyone knew it. Cresson and Davos urged patience, something that Stannis usually had in abundance, and understanding. These men and women had gone from a place of power in the old regime to essentially exiles under Robert. Lord Adrian of House Celtigar, a large man who much enjoyed his luxuries, was particularly nice, which Stannis was beginning to use as a measure of dislike. Most of the other houses, both those sworn directly to Dragonstone and visiting from the Crownlands, greeted the new lord with similar displays. Strangely, House Valerium and its pale-haired, pale-eyed Lord Montford seemed genuinely willing to make peace with Stannis. He did not understand. They'd been the staunchest Targaryen supporters, and yet now they seemed genuinely content under his rule. Cresson, when asked, had shrugged and responded that it was only natural because of what Stannis had done for them. Admittedly, Stannis supposed that taking in the Targaryen babe was a good reason for their behavior. But the other houses and landed knights of Dragonstone, Driftmark, Claw Island, Cracklaw Point, and the Crownlands also knew that he'd taken Daenerys in, and that certainly didn't cease their animosity. Ah, well, he'd reasoned, at least I can make use of it. Thus he'd asked the Lord Montfort for leave to have one of his daughters come from Driftmark to educate Daenerys. The Lord had been surprised, though Stannis didn't know why. It was a perfectly natural course of action. All the same, the man had agreed, and next month Dragonstone would house Direnir Velaryon and her small retinue. Stannis admitted that he'd also hoped to evaluate the woman, as he still had plans to marry. Making a Velaryon the Lady of Dragonstone should go a long way into getting the rest of the houses to accept his rule. And besides, like every man, he needed heirs. What he did not understand was the strange reluctance he felt when thinking of his marriage, although he knew that he must do so. He was a lord, his responsibilities were many, and a wife was one of them. Stannis sighed. Since he'd arrived, very little work had actually been completed. The lords and knights played games and stalled whatever orders he gave. Stannis couldn't even punish them as he wished, for he reasoned that it would do more harm than good. Davos concurred. He'd experienced the same behavior when Stannis elevated him to Master of Rainwood. The people needed time to adjust is all, to get to know and respect him as their lord. Stannis just hoped they did it soon, because he'd very much like them to desist in paying unexpected visits to ensure their new lord was well, and then insisting that he allow them to pay their respects to Daenerys. If Stannis refused, they grew sombre and cast him suspicious looks, as if they suspect he was doing something nefarious to the child and trying to hide it. 7 hells, but he was tired of them covertly looking the baby over, sometimes right in front of me, and expecting to see injuries or neglect on the girl. Irritated, Stannis rounded a corner and almost ploughed right into a tiny form. Dressed in a blue concoction with many buttons and laces, her short hair interwoven with tiny silver ribbons, Daenerys Targaryen stood before him, nearly scaring the living daylights out him. "Bloody!" Stannis bit back the words, stumbling awkwardly to a halt inches from her, aghast to see Daenerys alone in the hall. She stood there, and gazing at him with wide, violet eyes, mouth popped open, as if she was as similarly astonished by his presence. For a good minute, Lord and Ward simply stared at each other, frozen. What in the world is her nurse thinking? The castle is too dangerous to allow an infant to traverse the halls alone. Angry, Stannis frowned severely, glaring at the empty corridor that suddenly seemed much more menacing than before. Her suite of rooms was down the hall and to the right, occupying a whole corner of the tower, and opposite of his own. He'd placed her and Myra in the ladies' chambers, because he didn't fully trust the people of this island, and his personal guard was too small to properly patrol this area as well as the nursery. Despite his careful sweep, there was no Myra in sight. Scowling deeply, Stannis released a powerful exhale. "Where is your—" The infant gasped and flinched back, toppling over to fall onto her bum. Her wide eyes remained on him, now wary. To his horror, tears were gathering. 7 hells, slowly, as is she, was a feral animal. Stannis took a few steps back and crouched carefully, arms up in appeasement. All he needed was for some lord or knight or Myra to find him alone in the hall with a crying Daenerys. The rumors would spread like wildfire, and he was grimly sure that Cresson would attempt to flog him, verbally, if not physically. "Calm yourself. I am not angry," he said quietly, smoothing his face into what he hoped was concern, but probably looked like indigestion. "Where is your nurse?" "Myra. Where is Myra?" She just stared at him, but at least she blinked away the tears. Her mouth shut, and she pursed her lips at him, scrunching her small face in confusion. "Rai," Stannis articulated slowly, looking over his shoulder, but there was still no one in sight. "Myra? Your nurse. Blonde woman, blue eyes." "Myra." Then he realized that he was attempting to communicate with an infant, and cursed himself. "Bloody hell, Stannis Baratheon, what are you doing?" Looking behind her desperately, hoping for someone, anyone, to come and take her away, he was unprepared for her response. His eyes jerked back when she spoke, surprised. "Ra," she responded, testing the sound, the feel of the word on her tiny lips. She looked up, as if demanding confirmation. "Ra." "Yes," he said, desperate. "What a smart child. Ra. Where is Ra?" Daenerys looked over her shoulder and then back at him. and then 7 hells. But then this 10-month-old infant looked him in the eye and shrugged. In response to his gaping mouth, the girl giggled, seemingly proud to have reduced the mighty Stannis Baratheon to a speechless fool. Perhaps this is punishment for rejecting the gods. Flabbergasted and completely out of his depths, Stannis searched for a solution. Should he leave and try to find someone? Or should he wait here until someone came? He eyed the girl and contemplated picking her up and taking her to Myra, but the last thing he needed was someone to see him holding her and assume the worst. He was distracted from his thoughts when she began to twist. The child placed her palms against the ground and slowly, carefully, pushed herself up until she was standing. She wobbled slightly and pitched forward. Stannis instinctively jerked his arms toward her, but Daenerys caught herself on her hands, legs still firmly on the ground, and paused in that position as if to gather her resolve. Then, glancing determined up at him, she pursed her tiny pink lips and tried again. Ridiculously, Stannis felt his heart pounding. 7 hells. She makes standing seem as if it's the most difficult endeavor ever achieved. Then, immediately following, he thought, yes, that's it, just a bit more. You can do it. And finally, she did. Stannis exhaled in relief when she achieved a fully vertical orientation. She looked tired, he felt tired, and he'd only watched. She smiled at him, almost smug, and he couldn't help it as his own lips curled in return. Then Stannis frowned, shaking his head. What in the hells am I doing? But it seemed the girl wasn't done yet, because she began to carefully walk towards him, testing each action as if memorizing the particular mechanics of movement. He eyed her as she slowly made her way to him, still crouched, so he was at her level. Then, just when the tiny child was nearly to him, she tripped. Like lightning, Stannis' hands shot out and caught her around the waist. She looked at his hands, then up at his face, and beamed. Stannis felt his chest clench uncomfortably tight. "Blessed gods," a voice whispered, and suddenly Stannis remembered just where he was. He jerked his hands away and looked up almost guiltily, like a child caught being disobedient. Behind Daenerys stood Myra, eyes wide and a hand covering her mouth. Then Stannis remembered just how he came to be in this predicament and made to stand and confront the woman for her negligence. But he jerked to a halt when Daenerys grabbed him, tiny hand only able to wrap around his index finger. She raised her arms towards him and waited expectantly to be lifted. Getting the notion that he was being ordered around by an infant, Stannis nevertheless carefully grasped her around the waist and stood, holding her at arm's length. Daenerys frowned and squirmed. Obviously, this isn't what she'd had in mind. She eyed him petulantly, lips pursed in displeasure. Stannis had never been more uncomfortable in his life. Myra gave a startled laugh, and Stannis realized he'd again forgotten himself. He scowled at her. "This is unacceptable," he scolded, allowing the child to just walk freely through the keep. "There are stairs here, taller than she is. What if she'd stumbled and hurt herself, woman?" Myra's eyes began to water, and tears fell down her cheeks. Stannis immediately regretted his tone, but 7 hells, she should be more careful. He opened his mouth, trying to find the words to halt the unseemly display, and faltered. The baffling creature stretched her red lips into a huge smile, teeth showing unabashedly. She laughed and cried at the same time, running forward to snatch Daenerys out of his grasp, and showered the squirming girl's face with kisses. Stannis stood there, convinced that he would never comprehend the woman, laughing and crying at the same time. "What in the world are you doing? This is a serious matter." Myra smiled at him, holding Daenerys close. "Yes, my lord. I do understand, and I will be more careful, but—" She released a delighted laugh. "I am simply too overcome at the moment. What a magnificent day it is. If only," she sighed, bittersweet, "if only her grace was here to take joy in this glorious moment. She would have been so pleased, my lord. I can just imagine the brilliance of her smile." Oblivious to the thoroughly confused Stannis, Myra gazed lovingly at the baby girl, who looked to be falling asleep. "Your mamma would have been so proud of you, my love." "I do not understand," he stumbled, brows furrowed. She looked at him, smiling softly, sea-blue eyes glistening, and Stannis involuntarily threw that she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Ruthlessly, he banished the thought. "Control yourself, Baratheon. "I did not leave her alone, my lord," she explained gently. "I put her down for a nap and then sat before the hearth to stitch, as I do every day. But when I looked up," she laughed, "the bed was empty. Oh, but you cannot imagine my horror. I felt as if someone had hit me over the head. That's how thoroughly shocked I was." Well, she sure didn't sound like it. I rushed out the door as soon as I noticed it ajar, mind whirling in a million horrible possibilities. I was convinced she had somehow been stolen away. And then I rounded the corner to see my adventurous little princess walking towards you. "Walking, my lord." She grinned up at him, and Stannis began to comprehend. His chest again experienced that uncomfortable tightness, and he looked down at the now sleeping girl. Gently, as if knowing that Stannis was vulnerable at that moment, Myra said, "Her very first steps, my lord, and she goes directly to you." Over the next month, Stannis gained a tiny shadow. Now that the Daenerys had learned to walk, she deemed following Stannis around as he saw to matters within the keep as an appropriate use of her time. Myra found this endlessly amusing, and would patiently follow behind the girl as she explored her new home. When in council with Davos and Cresson, Stannis found that the child was a much more compelling sight than matters of food storage, defense, and inter-house relations. Davos had taken to bringing tiny sweet cups of milk for the girl, while Cresson would endlessly go on about how her early ability to walk foreshadowed a brilliant mind. This was ridiculous, of course. Robert had taken to walking much earlier than Stannis, but no one would ever say the man was more intelligent. Stannis kept this fact to himself, of course, because he was intelligent. Overall, they were getting very little work done, but he seemed to be the only one to protest. "They're only this age for a few short instances, my lord," Davos had said, fondly thinking of his own children. "The Word is a new, wonderful place. It's a glorious sight to see." Stannis found himself frequently late to appointments because the child refused to simply be carried places. He must then walk very slowly and stop often if she tired. He could no longer even be cold and scathing when he reprimanded his men or ordered the constriction of a new forge, because Daenerys would look wary and Myra would give him a reproving look. Furthermore, it was damn difficult to appear properly intimidating with a small child beside him, and his people had taken to looking between the two of them rather than listening to Stannis. The only good thing that came about from it was that the high-born nuisances at court had taken note of the behavior, and it had finally proved to them that Stannis was not mistreating the child. Slowly, they'd begun to comply more willingly, but there was still a good amount of distrust and resentment amongst them. Apparently, a tiny Targaryen with silvery hair and violet eyes couldn't fix everything. Finally, when the behavior had truly begun to impede the running of the house, he'd had to lower himself and compromise. One simply couldn't be a lord and have her with him at all hours, and he was reluctant to simply order Myra to stay away. As inconvenient as Daenerys's presence was, he found that he didn't mind how interested she was in him, and he took curiosity rather than the ability to walk as a true sign of a keen mind. Thus, Stannis now found himself spending 2 hours, one in the morning and one in the evening, sitting beside Myra and watching Daenerys explore Aegon's garden, with its towering trees and blooming roses and cranberry bushes. Sunshine was apparently good for children, although Stannis had spent most of his childhood indoors alone, and he'd turned out fine. He was expected to be in awe of whatever small treasure she found, be it a leaf, a flower, or, once, a brightly coloured insect. Myra cooed over everything and applauded her endlessly, and Stannis was slowly becoming more accustomed to his newfound responsibility to praise her, though he did it much more briskly than the nurse. He didn't think this was the proper way to raise a high-born female, but he supposed Myra would know better than he. He also had no idea if other lords spend nearly this much time with their children, especially their female ones, let alone with their wards. Nevertheless, Stannis didn't generally concern himself with what others thought to be appropriate behavior, or he'd have turned out like Robert. He was spending quite a bit more time with the nurse than was proper, he knew. And despite whatever attraction Stannis felt towards her, he believed that desires of that sort should be met only with one's wife, to avoid future complications. Although it would be a lot easier to remember that if the woman didn't smile at him so often, as if she genuinely liked him, If she didn't constantly engage him in conversion and look at him with this hopeful look that he couldn't quite meet, he couldn't allow himself to get any closer, or else he'd be unable to forget her once he married. I've never before resented being highborn, he threw. If I didn't have all of these responsibilities, he looked to Daenerys playing in the grass, I could wed whomever I wished. And if he'd been a different man, perhaps he could stomach wedding some woman and keeping Myra with him. But that had never been Stannis. Robert's opposite in every way, which brought him to current matters, greeting the Lady Dirnia Velaryon, her 2 ladies' maids, and 4 personal guards. He sat upon his throne, surrounded by the various lords, ladies, and knights sworn to his house, as the herald announced her. This may be my future wife, Stannis thought, studying the beautiful young girl that curtsied deeply before him. She was dressed in the pale turquoise of her house, which he admitted suited her blue eyes and pale, plaited golden hair. Jernia of House Valerian greets you, my lord, and offers wishes of goodwill to the Lord of Dragonstone on behalf of my lord father. She smiled demurely, eyes lowered, and he was reminded of the guileless yet calculating women he'd come to know at Storm's End. Yes, this is what a high-born female is like. They do not show their teeth when they smile or tickle baby girls, or gently tease him when he is bemused by the affections of said baby girl. Reluctantly, Stannis decided that the woman before him would do. Now, to ensure she could properly care for Daenerys before he wrote to her father with his proposal. "Rise, my lady," he responded coolly, face grim. "I, Stannis of House Baratheon of Dragonstone, thank you for journeying here to provide a lady's education to my ward, Daenerys of House Targaryen. I trust the waters were pleasant," he added on as an afterthought. Davos always said he must be more pleasant in conversation, though Stannis thought it an annoying waste of time. This was to be his wife, however, and he supposed the effort was warranted. "Yes, my lord." "Thank you for your concern, my lord. The journey was pleasant, and, as you surely know, my lord father's ships are swiftest in all of Westeros. He will be honored to provide House Baratheon of Dragonstone with a few vessels for your fleet, as a gift of goodwill and prosperity between our houses." Stannis frowned. That was unusually generous. Perhaps Lord Montfort's thinking was aligned to Stannis's own, and he too sought marriage between Stannis and his daughter. It would make this easier, and certainly explain the man's unusual benevolence. He did not know if he was entirely comfortable with how easy the man had turned his back upon the Targaryens, however. "That is very generous," he said, eyes narrowed. "And what does your lord father desire in return?" For instance, her mask slipped, and surprise bled through. At that moment she seemed familiar to him, but he could not say why. Then she expertly covered it by lowering her lashes. "Nothing, my lord. Father simply wishes to thank you for all you have done for House Velaryon." Stannis frowned. He was getting the feeling that he'd done something for these people that he was unaware of. He searched his mind, but could not remember any past dealing with the Targaryen loyalists. He was aware of Crescent and Davos glancing at him, the former frowning and the later in concern. What did he not know? Myra arrived at that moment, with Daenerys in her arms, and his breath left him. She was dressed like a lady. He'd never before seen her in full formal wear, did not know she even owned any gowns, nor with her hair intricately plaited and lined with deep blue ribbons. She came before his thrones and curtsied with expert grace, smile cool and practiced. In her arms, Daenerys squirmed and looked at Dirnia in bemusement, pointed and questioned, "Rah!" And Stannis Baratheon suddenly felt like the biggest fool in the 7 kingdoms. 7 hells, you idiot, he thought, realization dawning. Myra was handmaiden to the queen. She spoke with an excellent, graceful cadence, said, "My lord," rather than "me lord," and not only that, but she was perfectly comfortable conversing with Stannis as if she was used to it. She was highborn. Stannis had a crisis of realization, horrified at how ridiculous he'd been this past year, at how rude and improper he'd acted towards a highborn woman. Bloody hells, and all because he'd been trying to avoid developing further affection for this woman who dared plead to a king before his court to spare the life of a child. Myra turned to the woman beside her, their faces nearly identically, and kissed her sweetly on the forehead. "Little sister, how I have missed you." How are mother and father, and our brothers? Have they grown? Dernier laughed, delighted, and responded that all was well. Then she looked to Daenerys and cooed over the child, calling her the most beautiful baby she'd ever seen. You have done well, sister. You have done our house proud. But you feed her. How can you be high-born? Stannis exclaimed a last desperate protest, and was immediately appalled with himself. The whole court turned to him in shock, silent. Cresson equally aghast at his lord's words, while Davos looked to him with widening understanding. They'd all know, only I've been a fool. Myra gazed at him, wide-eyed, and then slowly realization dawned. You didn't know, she breathed. I had wondered, this past month especially. I just thought, she cut herself off, shaking her head. But how? How could you possibly? She narrowed her eyes and suddenly passed Daenerys into her sister's arms. Hands lifting her skirts, she strode forward, climbing the steps to the throne and ignoring the riveted eyes of the court. Stannis sprang to his feet, wary and feeling as if he needed protection, but his bloody guards just let her pass right through. No, no. I know how, you frustrating man, she raged, stopping before him with her hands on her hips. If it's not castles and defences and armour and agriculture, you pay no attention at all. 7 hells, but you are the most maddening person I have ever met. I demand an apology, Stannis Baratheon, for making me think you are playing with me, for making me think I was imagining things. She paused, waited, and blared, well, Stannis, his mouth, and what came out was, marry me. What? She asked, eyes widening, but he didn't know with what emotion. His damn heart was beating too fast. Marry me, he hesitated, clearing his throat. I think we would suit, and I'm a lord, and you'll be Lady of Dragonstone, and I think your father approves already. You already know the castle and servants, and you already sleep in the ladies' rooms, and you'll be close to your home, and Daenerys is here. He ended, broke off with a curse. It was the most feeble argument Stannis had given in his life. He was so bloody embarrassed he thought he'd faint, and then the court truly would never respect him again. Bloody hell's what had happened to him. A year ago he'd been comfortable, with his rules and his principles, and now he was this ridiculous man who yielded to a child and made a fool of himself before his court. Gods, the whole realm would know soon. She tilted her head, eyes narrowed upon his pathetic self. And, she huffed, and will this be a marriage of convenience, because I fit your requirements and already sleep in the lady's room? She mocked, scowling. Stannis swallowed. No, he said, just for her ears alone. It would please me if you were my wife. Only you. She stared at him and slowly softened, a smile spreading her lips. Yes, you idiot, she whispered. I don't know where you'd end up, if I don't. Probably brainwashed into some mad cult doing stupid things. Now that was a bit insulting. Stannis was not such a gullible man. But, well, she'd agreed, so what did an alternate future really matter? Davos stepped forward, clearing his throat and breaking their stare. Congratulations are in order, my lord, my lady. I believe now would be a good time to adjourn court, so we may acclimate ourselves to recent events. Stannis would kill Davos for the amusement in his tone, he decided. Filled with dread, wondering how badly he'd shamed himself before the court, Stannis took a deep breath and grimly surveyed his people. But unlike what he'd expected, there wasn't derision or disgust on their faces. Most women, especially, he noted with unease, looked like they were positively beaming. The amusement was gentle rather than mocking, and he got the feeling that he'd finally done something right for these strange people. They've had to stomach the Mad King and all his evil for many years, Myra explained gently. Now another fool sits upon the throne. She ignored his reproving look. And they haven't, we haven't, felt truly secure for a long, long time. But you will make them safe. You finally proved yourself, Stannis, proved that you are not just a brilliant, cold lord, but a man. The blood of Valyria is passionate, and a lord must be able to understand his people. Fear grants a brittle power, and that lord is never safe. Respect, however, she grinned, that endures. In Dernier's arms, Daenerys giggled. and for the first time Stannis felt that perhaps he'd found his place.